Hello again, and welcome back to Data Beats Opinion. I am Keith Perhack, founder of SegMetrics, and I am here today with Jevin Maltais. And I'm just happy to have you, man. I know about you. Tell me
Sure.
a little, tell everyone else a little bit about you.
That's great. Thanks, Keith, for having me. My name's Jevin. So my background, I'm a software engineer, and over about a decade, I built this consulting thing with had a bunch of people, and all of them were remote. So probably over the past decade, I've hired and managed over 50 remote people, whether designers or developers or virtual assistants, whatever. I've done it all. So now what I'm doing is really focusing on helping companies who are traditional in that they work together in an office and helping them to become remote first so that they can have their existing workforce will be happier, they'll be more productive, they'll stick around
Hmm.
longer, as well as taking advantage of the global workforce. So
And
that's what I'm doing full time.
yeah, and this is interesting because a lot of bigger companies are just now going into this whole idea of, oh, let's have remote teams and remote first and kind of stuff. But especially in the marketing world, this has been the way it is for a long time now, because you want to find the best people,
Sure.
and you want to find the best people that aren't necessarily, that have a different alternative lifestyle, that are going to work, that want to work for an internet marketer,
Hmm.
that don't really fit into that same niche that is the whole corporate gig kind of thing. And
Sure.
I've been doing this 10 years, and I think every single person on every team I've worked with has been remote. I don't think that I've worked in a company in the marketing industry where everyone's in the same office. So,
It doesn't surprise me, and it's like what you said, it's because there's so many different niches of marketing that there's only a handful of people who are going to be experts in a very niche type of SEO or a very niche type of
mhm,
you know pay per click. And so to be able to hire the best people, they're more than likely will not be in your city. And
right.
so that doesn't surprise me at all for marketing. And it's the same for software, very, very niche specific areas where you're just not going to find people in the city.
And I think a lot of professionals now don't want to deal with living in the big city and don't want to move for work. That, especially the marketers that I work with, and even the developers I work with, they're very life focused. Not in a,
Mm,
oh, I don't care about work. They care
yeah,
passionately about work, but they don't want to have to move to a city that they hate, or they want to be able to have a life in addition to that work, or that work fulfills their life, right?
sure.
And being able to live in the middle of nowhere, Idaho or Montana or wherever, and still be a $1 million marketer
Yeah.
is a great plus.
Yeah, and a lot of these people who are very experienced in these niches are not 20 years old, right? They are
Yeah.
30, 40-year-old people. You and I are in our mid 30s, and we're in the family mode now, and so lifestyle is really important, where simplifying things, not having a 1 hour plus commute each way, which just
Right.
eats a huge piece of our of our day and our energy. It just doesn't make sense. And so
Yeah.
so that's why I feel it's like a really competitive thing to hire really senior people who maybe are in an office. I think it's pretty easy to be able to pull them away if they are, to
Yeah.
get them remote. But yeah.
And I think there's two sides of that works out really well. One is, like you said, so even when I was commuting close
Mm.
by, it was 45 minutes each way. So that's an hour and a
Wow.
half that I lose each day that I could be doing work, right?
Hmm.
And so as an employer, that makes me happy as well. It's like the people working with me are not wasting time on a train or in a car or whatever.
Yep.
Um, they're working, the time that they have is more available and is for working and being productive, right?
Yep. Exactly.
And so they don't have to work as much, and then they can have that work life balance. A number of the people that I work with are now stay at home moms or stay at home dads,
Hmm.
And not that they don't want to do anything, but they're watching the kids. They got to go pick up the kids at 3, or they got to
Yep.
get them ready, or and having that flexibility. These are super talented professionals,
Yeah.
right? That just don't want to do the 8 to 8 slog anymore,
Yep.
right?
And it's almost priceless. I mean, to be able to spend that time with your kids,
You know,
like,
I mean,
people might be able to give you a couple $1,000,000 a year to be able to like take a year of not seeing your kids, but like in general, it's not something you could put a price tag on.
right. I mean, I mean, you can see here we're all remote. That I'm working out of my home office,
Yep.
and today I have school conferences with my kids. So
Hmm.
normally, if I was working in an office, I would have taken today off,
Yep.
right? Instead, I woke up at 6. I got all my stuff done. After this, I'm gonna have lunch, go take the kids, come back, do more work, right? Like
There you go.
I have a lot more efficacy with my day and the work that I'm doing. Now the problem, is that the issue with that is that we're not in the same office. We're not
Mm.
building that culture. We're not understanding how each other are working together. You're kind of the expert at this. How do you overcome, especially if you're not used to having a remote team, or you feel like you're missing something with the remote team? How do you get people to enjoy that culture?
Yeah, yeah. So what I've noticed, because I've done both. I've been in an office and I've done remote. Is that people processes really like and like culture really uh, like deconstruct a lot faster in a remote environment. So what do I mean by that? I mean that when you're working together in an office, there's lots of band-aid solutions that just kind of like happen, that where you
Mhm.
don't have to be super intentional about it. Um, with remote, you have to spend a lot more effort, building these things into the company. And if you do, all things being equal, people, the research shows people who have the option to work remote, not necessarily people who are, everyone's working remote, but have the option to work remote, are happier, they're more productive, and they stay with the company longer. That's what the research shows. So how do we do that? So let's look at some examples. Well, if we're sitting in an office together, we're having lunch together typically. We say, hey, you guys want to eat lunch now? We're having coffee together. We're able to just tap each other on the shoulder and say, hey, I'm working on this one thing. I thought you should be involved. Or what do you think about this? Do you have 10 minutes to hash this out? Right. And then you
Mhm.
sit and you're just talking to each other because you're sitting next to each other. And so you're building like these relationships just by virtue of being in the same area and having these ad hoc conversations
Right.
with each other. With remote, it's a lot harder to do that because you have the advantage of doing deep work, where what I mean is you can easily book off like a 3-hour block where no one's going to disturb you. You can close Slack, close your email, and you can get a ton of work done. But the downside from that, of course, is you're not having kind of these ad hoc uh, conversations and opportunities to build relationships with your team.
Mhm.
So as a manager, who maybe is working in an agency, or you're in a software shop, or you're head of a marketing department, spending some time to think through, how are we going to solve these individual challenges, as a remote team, is really important and will really help you um, in being able to manage people. First thing is, implement one-on-ones with your team.
Yeah.
One-on-ones, it's a bit of a loaded word. There's probably, lots of people have lots of ideas of what that means. It's maybe the manager that's like tells you, well, hey, this is what you're doing this week, or give me
Mhm.
feedback about status updates. And that's not what I mean at all. There's some great blog posts by a guy, Jason Avanish, who runs this software product called Lighthouse that I often reference. But really, these are like employee led weekly meetings that are 1 hour long with your employee, where they talk about their challenges. They talk about, kind of their hopes and dreams for their career. They talk about, where they're feeling stuck, and if they're lonely. And by doing this over, you know 5, 10 weeks, let's say over 2.5 months, just imagine all of the information that you're going to be getting from your
Yeah.
employee about their true sense of how they are working in your agency and how they feel about things. Certainly the first couple of weeks, like, they'll say, yeah, everything's great. But as they get a sense of you really trying to reach out to them and understand their challenges, like, you're gonna really have a good sense about, you know where they're at and how you can help them.
And that's one of the things. The one-on-ones were always hard for me because
Yeah.
it's not my forte. And but they whenever I did have them, they were very important. But similarly, we did uh, for a long time we didn't have them, and then we started doing our daily stand-ups,
Hmm.
and that
How'd
changed
that go?
everything. Like
What was
just
your
to
structure for your daily stand-ups, and then what would you
it
what
was
was
actually
how did it change?
it was not too formal. I think it was about 15 to 30 minutes generally per day.
Okay.
Tried to keep them to 15, but it's just like, hey, here's what's up on the docket. Here's what we're doing. Here's the problems we have. The standard like Scrum questions, right? What did I do?
Right.
What am I doing? What's my
What am I
blockers,
blocked? Yeah.
right? And we had tried it through Slack and those things, and man, people hated them. Like,
Really?
oh
Okay.
yeah, the automated thing. The team really hated anything automated that reminded them to do things. They had a
Okay.
real like myself included. I remember I was gone for a week, and I was watching the Slack scrums, right, and like what's
Mhm.
coming up,
Mhm.
and one of them one of the product managers kept writing in his thing, Keith comes back in 3 days, your days are limited. Because he had convinced me to get rid of it when I got back.
Right. Well, that's a good test. I mean, if people are hating it and no one sees value over a period of a week, probably time to
Yeah.
reevaluate how we're
and
doing
and I
anything
think
really.
yeah, and I think different teams react different ways. Some people love
Mhm.
them, and
Yep.
some people don't like being on a 15-minute stand up. But I think, and maybe it's different per team, but I find in the marketing industry at least,
Mhm.
most of the clients we work with, most of the customers we work with, everyone likes that 15 minutes because they don't like reading, they don't like going
Right.
through all of the it's another task, it's another thing of email that they have to do, whereas a conversation is much more energizing and fluid, especially when you're by yourself all day.
Sure. Now, my experience working with software engineers is they're like, I don't want to talk to anyone. I
Yep.
don't want to see face. Like, I just like, let me just type my thing in. Let me just drag in my to dos. And like, I just want to get back to working. And
Hmm.
so it totally, I'm a advocate for not having a one size fits all, remote process because every person is different. And therefore every company is different about how you're going to implement your people processes, whether it's remote or
Hmm.
not. So that I love how you guys are just adapted, and so you just changed from this automated thing to this stand-up thing
Yeah.
in person or on video, and that seemed to work.
And so here's a good question. What if you have a team that is different? So
Mm.
some people want to just do the, okay, I type in my answers and I'm done. And some people want to be on that call. Is that part of a culture decision you make when hiring? Or is that a thing where you make it so that some people can do one and some people can do the other?
Yeah, that's I think it's a great question, and um, I, I think it really, I like to look at things as like really small atomic team based decisions. Like likely the core people that you're going to work with are only going to be another, say another two or three or four people that you're really interacting with every day. Say
Hmm.
on a small marketing or a small software engineering team. And so like though you need to figure out between your team what cadence and what type of thing you're going to do. And maybe not have like a company wide policy of this is how we do stand-ups, this is how, whether it's going to be automated or this is how it's going to be. And as a maybe you're higher up on the executive and you really want to have a dashboard to see like who checked in today, what are they doing, and so you want to mandate this thing, but the reality like is that like it's may not be the best thing for your team if even if that's the way that you want to see
Right.
it, and you have to find other ways to maybe get the reports or information that you want, or you need to be able to figure out a way so that you can learn or develop trust between you and your employees.
And then that brings in an interesting question, which is, are there certain roles that you feel are better suited towards people in the office versus remote?
Mm.
I know a lot of places are like, oh, the designer can be remote because it's a self-owned or department, right? It's a self-owned organism, kind of like a black box. But are there
Mhm.
things that you find that don't work well when they are remote?
I'd like to think that every job can be remote. I kind of see that as a personal challenge of like, how could we build this infrastructure for so this person who wants to be remote, and that's something we need to be clear about. Some people want to be in an office around other people. There's ways you can set that up, but like if this person really wants to be remote, we can figure out a way to do that. And I should also say like maybe teams are only partly remote, so like you're in the office maybe 2 days a week and you're at home 3 days a week.
Hmm.
Um, I've seen it work pretty well where for designers specifically that they work from home 3 days a week, and then 2 days a week they're in the office with the other designers or other people where it's highly collaborative and they really value getting around on the whiteboard
Yeah,
and having kind of that highly interactive thing. You can do that online. There's online whiteboarding software.
but never as good. They're never, yeah.
The research shows I found a paper from the 90s where they did a research to do a virtual like a whiteboard that had a video thing pointing at it and
Hmm.
everyone on video, and people sitting in the office together on the whiteboard, and they're finding that the results were just as good.
I
um,
will agree with that. Having a video on a physical whiteboard, I think, would be
mhm.
just as good. The
but the
digital
mhm.
whiteboards don't. I don't think they work as well.
And that could be fine. Like
Yeah,
that's just
it's
something maybe we have to try out as in a company. The challenge is like when you have like a hybrid company. So you have some people that work together in the office together, like regularly in the office, and you have these people that just are not in the office. So
hmm
let's take that whiteboarding example where you've got like, all right, let's go. Keith is out here. He's in Portland. And Jevin and the rest of the team are all together in their office in Ottawa. And so we're doing this collaboration thing. We've got Keith over in the corner on a laptop with the webcam looking at the whiteboard, and the other three people are kind of hovering around this whiteboard and trying to do the collaborating deeply. But
hmm
like when you do that, like it's really hard to have Keith engaged in the conversation
right,
and in the interaction in the same way as you would with the other three people. So this is when there's some real challenges with hybrid teams where you have to come up with processes that work so that every member of the team is on like this equal footing of being able to engage and contribute in a similar way.
right. And that's one of the problems that I think when you have especially a hybrid team, you run into. But I think that there's also, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a personality type that I have found can just disappear into the ether when they are working remote, right? Where
Tell
it's
me
just
about
kind of
that.
like
What kind of personality would that be?
someone who, I mean, just sits down and does the work and doesn't give that feedback. And it's about, I find that people have to be more proactive when they're remote than
Yeah.
reactive. At an office, I
Oh
think you
yeah.
can be much more reactive because someone's standing around looking and can say, "Hey, what's going on?" Where if you are doing that remote, you just kind of get lost. Like, and
Sure.
at some point, someone's just going to stop emailing you, right? Like,
Right. Right. I mean, I'm not a fan of someone standing in the office saying, "Hey, what's up, everyone?" Like give me a status update. Like, oh my gosh, is that so? Like, it's so disruptive, right? And that's
it's
one of
like
the
in the
band aids
morning,
that I'm
right? Like,
talking about. Yeah, I mean that's fine. Like, hey, how's everyone doing? It's fine. But like, that's like a people process. That's a band aid, one of those band aid things that I'm talking about.
hmm
But that person who's really on their own, like, we need to figure out ways to be able to engage them, and so that they feel like over communicating is like really important, and communicating well is super important for remote teams because
yeah,
you're probably not going to be interacting as much with other people if you're not in the office, and so you need to be able to like communicate your thoughts in Slack or in your project management system to put it out there and have people talk about your ideas and your struggles. It's like, I'm struggling with this, what do you guys think? um, and so those people that are kind of out on their own, it's dangerous for them because we're not, first of all, we don't actually know how they're feeling about the situation because they're
hmm
not communicating, but also because they have a ton of value to give. Like, they have lots of thoughts about how things are working in the company, about the different initiatives that we have, and we need to figure out ways to engage them. And there's different ways we can do that. If you want, we can talk about that too.
yeah. Let's talk about how do you, because that's part of bringing it in to the culture, and I think that's one of the hardest things about that team or that team dynamic when you don't have group meetings or you don't
Hmm.
have yearly retreats or something like that. How do you
Yeah.
build that culture and feel and make people feel or have people feel like they're on the same page?
Yeah. So we need to find ways to be able to build rapport with one another. We could talk tactics. So let's talk tactics. So I'm a big tools guy, which I have to be careful of. So whenever there's like a problem, I'm like, is there a tool for this? Is there a software tool? Is there a Slack bot I can add? So a couple of simple things that we can do. There's a really one way is we want to just be able to create some like informal times for team members to meet each other, especially those who are not normally going to engage with one another. So there's this tool called Donut. Have you heard of this Donut?
No, I don't think
Donut.
I have.
So it's donut.com, and you add this bot to your Slack, and you create a channel like, donut coffee or something, and people opt in to this channel. And what happens is, every so often you can program it, say every 2 weeks, Donut will match you up with other people in your company that you normally wouldn't engage with,
Hmm.
based on which channels you're participating in. And so it'll just connect the two of you and say, hey, you guys should have coffee. Just a really simple thing. And then you just, you guys coordinate either offline or somehow to connect together, and you just, learn about each other. And it'll ask you, did you connect? And so
Hmm.
I've had some really interesting,
That's
met some
really
really
cool.
interesting people. And so it's super like low touch, really easy to to add to your system. But like, it's just a really nice thing to build into your company. They had
Hmm.
some, I mean, they talked about this, like their big, thing that they like to talk about is that I think IBM added this tool,
Hmm.
and they introduced the system just happened to introduce two people across the company who were working on very similar projects in totally opposite ends of the company. And they ended up collaborating, doing a joint presentation, and like all this cool synergy, whatever happens. Um, but even but even in
Feel good
smaller
case studies.
companies, right? Where you only have like 20 people, like a salesperson may not talk to a developer at all. But even just meeting people will be like, hey, like, oh, I'm selling this, I sold this thing of yours. And hey, like, oh, they're like, oh, I worked on this feature. Like, oh wow, like, the salesperson can talk about, well, the
Hmm.
person loves it. Like, it's their favorite thing. Like, oh well, I had no idea about that before. So you never know. And now you have this relationship that a salesperson has to a developer,
Yeah.
that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And so having this thing on a weekly or bi-weekly cadence is a really nice way to be able to link people up.
Yeah.
Um, mhm,
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing. It's interesting that there are so many tools now built specifically for B2B for companies going especially remote,
mhm.
right? Like this has become a huge niche for software and for services to like just serve very specific niche needs in the B2B space. Um, yeah, but I think
Yeah, because there's so many problems. People are
yeah,
lonely. People don't
yeah,
know each other. People don't have rapport. Managers aren't trusting their remote employees. And so it's like,
mm,
how can we build in some things to allow for managing people in a healthier way?
right. And it's interesting, especially like I've done game nights and stuff like that.
Hmm.
I've done beer nights where we'll all grab a beer and just kind of hang out on Zoom like this, talking.
Fun. Yep.
Um, and I think that having those every now and then is very fun. What gets I think to be a difficult balance is one of the reasons a lot of people are remote is because they don't want to do that. They don't want to
Hmm.
have the weekly, okay, we're all going out to get a beer. Okay, work's over. You're expected to be here till 7 o'clock drinking with us or like hanging out or playing games or whatever, right? Because they are remote and they do value their own time.
Hmm.
Um, so it's an interesting balance of how do you keep that camaraderie. And I really like the donut software idea. I'll have to check
Hmm.
that out.
Sure.
But how do you keep camaraderie when A, everyone's probably on different time zones, and
Yeah.
B, not necessarily everyone wants to do that hangout, right? And how do you make it a low pressure thing when you're all still
Yeah.
sitting in front of the computer like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a whole article I just realized called "Virtual Team Building." This is my foray into like trying SEO topics and keyword planner. I got marketing experts here, but like I'm not a marketer. I want to be a marketer, and so this is my challenge. But I've got a whole article on it, with some like video games you could do.
Mm.
Space Team that Keith and I
Oh
have played
yeah, yeah, yeah.
together.
I
You
like
can
that.
set this up where it can be entirely through the internet. Um, What was the other major one? Oh, even like Portal 2. Portal 2 is a real, came out years ago. You can
Mhm.
run it on any computer, Mac or Windows, and it's a really good cooperative game. You could have competitions between your employees, who's doing a better job, as well as people giving like tours of their neighborhood using Street View. Like we have some fun ideas that you can do.
That's cool. That's
Um,
cool.
but so but people, it's true. I mean, people don't want to take their evenings, and um, I mean, I live for hanging out with people in
Yeah.
general. So for me, I prioritize it, but it is a challenge to do it in the evenings, and so I try to figure out a way to do it on on com-
On company
uh,
time. So
on
it's
company time. Sorry,
right.
my headphones were just telling me that the battery's low. But yeah, I would try to do it on company time, and I think it'll pay dividends for that
Right.
1 hour that you've taken together.
Yeah. And I think that's a solid way to do it, like either doing it in the morning or doing it before the first person leaves for the day, is so that it is part of that day where normally they would be working. So they're not having to give up anything,
Mhm.
right?
Yes, exactly. And the regular company wouldn't. I'm hoping, right? Like, you have to come and stay on a Friday night to come have beer with us. It's like, really? Like, people who have kids at home, your most senior people, like, they're not going to want to do that. Like,
Yeah.
maybe they want to because there's kids at home, but maybe
Yeah. I
like.
still remember we had a VR set in the office, and we
Mhm.
did an after work VR thing. And I was like, "When are you coming home?" And I realized I'd been late for like 3 hours. I'm like, "Oh, I'm just finishing up some work."
Finishing.
And
Technically, it is kind of
I
a.
went back into the VR.
Right, right.
I still feel bad about that.
Oh, apparently. Well,
But
your wife's
but
not
it
listening.
yeah, it is important, I think, to build that camaraderie. Um Now, there are a lot of businesses that don't actually want that camaraderie. They want more like a black box setup where, okay, I have this person over here in Alabama who, when I
Mhm.
have this thing I need them to do, I send it to them on Trello and they do it and it comes back. Like this whole black box kind of setup. Have you worked? I know you work with more bigger companies that don't necessarily want that.
Right.
But has that been something that you've seen as well as a trend?
I haven't. I would see them like maybe companies who would see the individual more as a contractor, where
Mhm.
they're like, hey, like this is just something we want to give them a couple hours a week. We've got built this whole process, and they just don't want to invest the energy into that individual because they're not gonna they're not planning on keeping them around long term, or the value that they're providing is very commoditized.
Right.
And so, which, there's a place for that, right? There's the whole gig economy, Upwork, Fiverr type of thing. There's totally a place for that in the company. But if you do want but the reality, like if you have an employee that you're treating that way, I can, like, likely they're having a crappy time, and
Right.
they're not going to stick around in the company for a long time. Um,
And how can you prevent your employees from feeling that way? Because that is something that you can fall into, right? Especially if
mhm,
the person isn't proactive, or if you're someone who gets distracted easily and can't really follow up as well as you'd like. Like
right.
there's a lot of things, I think, as the hire or as a team manager or as the quote unquote boss in there,
Mhm.
that can mess up that relationship. So what are some of the issues that you see that kind of damage that relationship with a remote worker?
Well, I think it's, in large part, I think it's, the manager who is not managing well. I mean, that's implicit in the question, or implied in the question, but, like, if you're not talking to this person to finding out, like, how they're doing in the company, like, if they're okay with, how they're engaging with the company, and, like, if you don't have really solid answers about, how they're feeling about it, or how they're, um, you need to do a better job, whether it's through doing one-on-ones, or
Hmm.
um, finding other ways to build rapport with them. So if that's not your intention and you want them to feel part of the company, then I would say, like, you need to find some strategies that work for you as a manager that also work for that employee, to find those things out and find a
Hmm.
way to draw them into the company, to show them that they're valuable, and to hear their thoughts, because I mean, people generally want to be want to be helpful and feel like they're part of the team. And so there's probably lots of value that you're missing from that individual if they are an employee, where you could engage them deeper and they could
Hmm.
provide even more value. Because if they're doing this one segmented small siloed thing, then they've got some deep expertise on that one small siloed thing that they're not able to maybe spread or give that information out to the greater company, that could be super valuable for your product manager or your salesperson or your CEO. So by engaging them more as a manager, you can draw out all of that extra value that I'm sure that they would be happy and to provide. If that
Right.
makes sense.
It's interesting. I think that a lot of people forget that you still need to be a good manager to the remote team as well. I mean, I think they know it on a mental level, but there's a difference of, oh, I need to manage the people in front of me versus I need to manage these amorphous connections out there on the internet. Even though we have a relationship with them, I
Right.
think it does become, for a lot of people, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, and it's even more important to hire people remotely,
Yeah.
I think, because the manager won't have the same relationship with someone who's sitting next to them in the office, you're having lunch with all the time, than the person who remote, because you're just not those ties are just not as strong. And
Hmm.
so, I've talked to someone, this remote. I interview lots of HR professionals to get their take on remote, because they're on the front lines of finding out these problems and hiring, recruiting, and you know, and one thing that one woman said is, being able to manage the person in front of you is like the lowest form of management, right?
Hmm.
The problems that
Interesting.
exist right in front of you and putting out fires is like is it's important, but it's like the lowest tier of managers. You want to be
Right.
able to go and be more proactive and work on bigger strategic problems. Um, so yeah, it's
Interesting.
hard. It's
Yeah.
really hard.
Yeah. And what are do you have any resources, or are there any resources specifically for managers who are trying to manage remote teams?
Yeah,
I mean that's obviously what you do as a professional, is teach that. But what are
yep.
some things that you kind of say, hey, you should really check this out, or this is something you should really think
Glad you asked. I have a
about?
tool. I didn't tell him to do this. He
No,
just asked me.
I have no idea what you're going to say.
I have a tool on buildingremoteteams.com, called my remote manager quiz. So you press
Ooh,
that, it'll ask you 18 different questions, and it'll tell you your rank relative to other kind of remote managers who have filled it out. And it'll give you a host of different things that you need to work on, and it'll give you some starting points, like, hey, check out this resource, or here's some other ideas that you can get started. So it said, here's where you're maybe struggling, and here's where you're doing great. And so that would be
that's
a great starting point. That's very custom and
I'm
made
gonna
for you.
check that out, and we're gonna do a wipe right now as I take the quiz, and then
Yeah.
it'll come back and says it said I was garbage. I got I got a 0 out of 18.
Well, then at least there's lots of room for
There's lots of
improvement.
room for improvement.
And
That's awesome. I did not know you had that.
yeah, it's a couple weeks old. But like, don't be discouraged if you do take it, and like, but just knowledge is half the battle. Was that the drugs commercial
GI
from
Joe.
the
It's
90s?
GI Joe.
GI Joe. Knowing is half the battle.
Now, not yeah. Knowing is half the battle. That's right.
Knowing is half the battle. So it's like, yeah, don't be discouraged. It's like, hey, you've taken the first step. You want to be a better manager? Well, great. You now have effectively a checklist of things that you could start doing for your team that will guarantee help to draw out the best of your team. Not to be too cheesy, but like we just talked about all these issues about why people feel crappy when they're not being managed well. But
Hmm.
hey, you manage them well, and like you're going to see incredible things happen from your team.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, that's what it really comes back to, is that I think that you really hit the nail on the head, which is managing people in front of you is kind of the lowest common denominator.
Hmm.
Putting out fires is the lowest common denominator. If you really want to be able to manage well and to be a good manager and to really be able to grow your team into professionals, you have to be able, if you can manage them remotely, then you can manage anyone.
Yeah, I mean, if someone's sitting next to you and they're crying, and they're their manager, like you're going to turn to them and be like, "Yo, like, what's up? You know, like that's low tier
Oh,
stuff
not
that,
me. No, I,
no,
if
you're like,
someone broke down in front of me, I have no idea how to react. I am
the
gone.
the the next tier is people are crying at home and you don't know about it, you
Right.
know? Like,
Right.
this is
But
what's happening. And then above that is like, hey, you're just being proactive so that people are crying at home, you
right.
know? Like, this is like, this is it, man. I don't know.
Yeah, on Reddit and talking to friends who have had great managers in the past, it's always interesting to hear that it's the people I've talked to have had great managers. They're able to navigate that whole process so that it doesn't affect their team, right? So that
Yeah,
it's able to protect them. And being able to head that off is the highest level of programmer, or not programmer, of manager at
a
that point.
manager.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard it said, you know, managers are really like shit umbrellas. What's it? Pardon my French, but like they're there to head things off,
Yeah.
to protect you so that you can do your best work, right? And
Yeah.
so, I don't know. I think you're absolutely right. I've had only one good manager in my entire career of working professionally, like whatever, 14 years, and they're so rare. But
Yeah.
um, you know, there's a saying in the industry that people don't quit companies; they quit managers.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if for anyone listening, like who's quit jobs before, like likely that's been the case.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's amazing the difference that those makes. I've been lucky enough to have two amazingly good managers I've worked with
Okay,
in the past.
tell us about those. Who were these people, and like what was that experience like?
Um, I mean, so one was at Ramit's, and then one was at Evans, and they were both the just the project managers for the companies.
Wow.
And it was a care and an understanding,
Mm,
and then a an understanding about where I was as much, and because we're all remote, right? So,
right.
and it's a care and understanding about the situation of where I was in addition to where the company is. So
Wow.
it was very aware of like, okay, there have been too many changes. Keith is getting frustrated. Let's just sit down and run through exactly what's going to happen because he has 800 emails, right? And there's no way
Wow.
he's going to
Yep.
parse this out,
Yep.
right? And stuff like that. And it's like, just this understanding of, okay, we're going to go through and test this, we're going to do it at the same time, we're going to, because if we do it in lockstep it's going to be faster, right?
Yeah.
Because the way that Keith works, he'll get stuff done in real time rather than sending emails back and forth for six
Yep.
hours right?
Sure.
So
How did he know you were frustrated?
um well, she knew because generally on the calls, right? Or just those one-on-ones, right? So
Okay, so
either,
you were having those, and that's how she was able to extract them.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So I think I mean, during those points, yeah, I mean, it's just communication, right? It's
Yeah.
either now it's through Slack, but it was through Skype, it's through phone calls, and it's just sitting on the phone for 2 hours, just
Yeah.
working, co-working, and stuff like
Nice.
that. Things that bring me in and made me feel like I was part of a team, and that we're all part of a team, right?
Yeah.
And that we're all doing this work.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I see a lot of people kind of chafe at the idea of having a manager, but I think whatever level you're at, um, you need someone to wrangle the cats,
Mhm.
right? And who understands the bigger picture beyond where you are. And maybe even if you understand the bigger picture, can at least fill you in on the details because not everyone's talking to everyone. So there has to be,
Yep.
you talk in software and especially in marketing about and analytics about a sole source of truth,
Mhm.
right? So especially with data, where's your sole source of truth? Where does that person and that data live that lets us know this person may is now worth $3,000 or spent $3,000 with us,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
Same with a company. You have to have someone who understands the sole source of the truth of everything because the person on top, especially with personality brands and even with SegMetrics,
Right.
we're crazy. We're
Mhm.
effed up crazy. And we'll come into the office and say, you know what we really need today is a mascot. We need to drop
Right.
everything. We're designing a mascot. And you need that person there that says, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
We're going to table it.
Yes.
We'll come back to it because here's what we're doing. And so we need that. You need
Yeah.
that filter of, okay, everyone is on the same page because there is a sole source of truth
Yes.
about what we're doing.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great managing up, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like, yeah, I love that. That's
And
really good.
it's interesting, the more people I talk to, more info marketers, the more SaaS owners,
Mhm.
especially in the smaller kind of personality brand type of places, everyone has that person.
Yeah,
And it's because the personality brand, the idea person, the person at the top gets so many ideas left, right, and
yeah,
forward. Is just like a waterfall. It's like a
yeah.
fire hydrant, right? And so you have to have someone that is filtering that. Otherwise, you're just jumping around like a ping pong constantly.
Yeah, but imagine the amount of rapport that that person has to have, especially so, especially let's say it's the head of the company, right? Who's the idea person, and the person below them who's somehow, managing the marketing team or the COO or something. Like, imagine the rapport for them to be able to say like no, or like okay, maybe,
Hmm.
and so but if it's remote and you don't have a lot, like you just don't meet with that person frequently, and you don't know them
Gets much
intimately, and
harder. Yeah.
how they work together, how you can work with them and how they think and what they're okay with hearing. These are real subtleties in relationships that take a long time to develop.
Yeah.
um, and so it takes a lot of effort to be able to build those into the relationships, and you have to find out ways to do it in your company, especially if not everyone's sitting in the office.
Yeah. Exactly. So one kind of last question that I want to ask, because I think it's important, is are there things when you're doing the hiring for remote workers that you find are either warning signs, like
Mhm.
should not this person cannot do this remotely, um or actually really good signs that you can say yes, this is a quality that most people who are able to work remotely effectively have.
Yeah, this is a great question. Two things that I look for that are kind of global in the remote work, is their communication skills.
Mm,
Um, they need to be able to be able to share their ideas, share their struggles really well, both through texts, like if we're heavy Slack users, or even email, or just through the internet in general, and be able to express themselves when they're doing video calls, so that in the one-on-one, like they are going to talk about how
mhm,
they're feeling and stuff. The second, I think, would be being proactive. When you're at home, it's easy just to like finish your task, and then you're like, well, I don't know what to do now, therefore I'm frustrated, or I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go and play video games now. you know Surely not something I do.
of course not.
But that's a growth thing. So people will be like, okay, like great, I finished those, and like, oh, I've got these things I really want to go and fix, and yeah, surely this will help the company. And so people that are kind of looking for opportunities to make the company better, looking for a history of that, I think are really important. Red flags would be kind of first, well, the inverse of each of those, right? If they're like
Right.
not able to express themselves when you're interviewing them, or they've said like, yeah, like I just want to put in my time, just I'm happy to get through, like if it's like customer support, like I just want to get through my tickets, and then yeah, I'll be good for, you know, what happens if I finish early? Like, can I just take the time off? It's like these are not
Right.
these are not great signs. Um, yeah, those would be the 2 that come to mind, up front, that are unique, I think, for remote, that I would really prioritize.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that because there's a lack, this sounds bad when I say it, but a lack of oversight when you are remote.
Mm,
Because honestly, it's trust. I mean,
yeah,
there's a lot of trust there.
yeah,
Of course, when someone's at the office, they could be browsing Reddit, but there's a modicum of trust that I think is implicit in being in an office,
yeah,
and it's harder to have that when they're remote. And so I think you're exactly right. You need someone who is willing to is proactive to go above and beyond. At least we realize that that's not always going to be the case. Some people get
right.
tired when they're like, okay, I'm done with my tickets, I'm just going to go take a nap. That's
Sure.
fine, but you want someone, especially in that initial phase, who's going to be like, I'm excited about this, I want
Yes.
to be proactive. And if we're done with my tickets, I bet I could find some support documentation, or I
Yeah.
can write some emails or something like that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think these things are really important. Um, it's challenging, man. I mean, as a manager, like we talked about, I think the overall theme is just harder to be a manager of remote people than it is for people in the office. But honestly, like I think the results and the result. I mean, the research is showing the results are there. If you can figure out how to make it work for your company and your remote culture to make the remote life work, um, your company will be that much better off.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Jevin, thanks so much for taking the time and sharing your expertise about with managerial hiring and especially remote teams. Where, if people want to get in touch with you, where should they go to find you?
Yeah, right on. You can check out buildingremoteteams.com. I do have a podcast that comes out mostly weekly where we talk about kind of the nuances related to remote work, related to focus, being distracted, loneliness, how to do one-on-ones, all of these kind of like different hard things about remote we dive into. And then if you've got particular problems with your remote team that you want to dive into, managing, hiring, whatever, or you are a traditional company and you want to go remote, then yeah, there's a button to schedule a call with me, and I'd love to be able to give you some ideas on the call and see if
Awesome.
see if I can help.
Yeah, and we'll link the quiz as well in the show notes because I think that's
Yes,
going to help a lot
quiz.
of
And are we
people.
going to put your results in there too, or
Dear
in the
Lord,
show
no.
notes?
It's just got
Amazing.
the poop emoji. Like
There
we
you
we
go.
all we all know what's happening there.
Thanks a lot for having me on this show,
All
Keith.
right,
This has
Jevin.
been
Thank
fun.
you so much.